And welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And today is the start of a new year. And with the start of a new year, we're going to do more reviews. And by more reviews, I mean we're just going to continue doing the same old, same old. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and please share this video with everyone that you know. And let's try to shoot for 1,000 subscribers. Why not? I mean, we've got the rest of 2024 laid out. Let's just go ahead and do it. Um, your moviness, how are you doing so far? You doing all right? You enjoying
Doing
yourself?
great, doing great. I had a great New Year's, right? New Year's was fantastic. Was glad to hang out with everybody. So looking forward to 2024 and looking for uh another play of movies. Let's see what's out there. So I mean, about the only thing I know right now, Deadpool 3, but probably
Well, don't forget.
gonna be interested to see what's on the 2024 slate.
Don't forget. Dune Part Two's coming out
Yes, that's
this
true.
year
Yes.
because it was originally supposed to come out in November, but that got canned because of the whole SAG strike. Oh, I was gonna say too. Now that the strike is over, production is set to resume over the next few months. So we'll actually starting to see more movies, premiere, more movies being made, and more TV series being produced. Hopefully, because we did a review of Blue Eye Samurai season 2 has been confirmed. Haven't heard anything about. You think for a show like Arcane, they would they would kind of get to it and try to get things out as soon as possible, but they're pretty much taking their sweet old time. I
Yes, they
mean,
are. Well,
why?
hopefully the wait is worth it.
I mean, let's keep in mind because Benioff and Weiss, they had a year and a half, and when season 8 of Game of Thrones came out, it was subpar. So, a little bit of a apprehension right there. Unfair comparison.
Don't
I
want to
know.
give anybody any flashbacks to the ending there of Game of Thrones. So hopefully nothing like that.
Right. I mean, we don't want to traumatize anybody. Not that we want to, because we all just want the new year to be as you know as clean of a slate as possible. So today we're going to be taking a look at a movie that came out in November. It's by the group Please Don't Destroy, and it's The Treasure of Foggy Mountain. Um, and I gotta say, this is probably the first SNL movie that's been out in what over a decade. I would say.
Yes.
Because I mean, like the '90s and early 2000s was like a heyday for SNL movies, and then it went dark for a while. So, so the reason why I want to take a look at this, not that I'm a fan of Please Don't Destroy, but it's because of the fact that this movie was actually shot in our backyard. Well, my backyard. You live over the border in South Carolina, but but this first came to my attention, I think, and I think it was either March or April of last year, in the Observer, where they're saying a bunch of a bunch of actors from SNL were seen in Noda near Uptown, and they were filming in certain spots, and then the filming moved to Concord, and then to Kings Mountain, and then I think the Juarez near Kannapolis. So more than anything else, I was interested just because this was a movie that was filmed, in the Charlotte area. Um,
And how
but
much of the movie actually was, what percentage of the movie would you say was in these areas?
um, I would probably say 100. Well, if we're talking about in North Carolina, 100%. But if we're talking about the Charlotte area, I would probably say about 85%, and that's including the Concord area because and we'll get into it too, but a lot of a lot of the scenes that you see in the sports store, that's actually shot at North Lake Mall. Um,
Yes, I did read it. I did read that.
so yeah, it was shot at North Lake Mall, and then that scene where they're skating around and they're just like, hey, we're just living life, we're just having fun. That was actually filmed in Noda. They just superimposed the mountain backdrop, and then that scene where the cult is doing its thing. I believe that's, I believe they shot that at Crowder's Mountain. I think that's where they shot it. Either Crowder's Mountain or Mount Mitchell, or a combination of the two. But let's go ahead and dive in. So Lee, what were your impressions of that movie?
Yeah, so it was, I guess, it felt like a bunch of skits put together, and I think the fact that you kind of pointed out that it's based upon this SNL troupe, Please Don't Destroy. Um, it made a lot more sense after I watched it because I did, kind of look at it. I'm like, oh, okay, this kind of makes more sense because it feels like there's a bunch of kind of disjointed skits that are thrown in with this overarching story.
Mhm.
So I guess the movie kind of starts off with, and got some nice voiceover there by John Goodman, who is obviously amazing. Really like him. So
I
glad to
was
hear.
really surprised to hear that was John Goodman because I was like, that voice sounds oddly familiar, but for whatever reason, I kept thinking it was Jeff Bridges. And then
Really
yeah, and then the middle, like in the middle of the movie, like the narrator's like, oh, but
fair. Kind of silly jokes where he's like, "Hey, throw me some eggs," and he just throws the carton, smashes against the wall. I'm like, okay, that was kind of funny. And then they're kind of end up getting some skates, right? And they're just skating down in the middle of the street to this like really playful music. And I'm like, okay, like this is fine. Like it's not like I'm not laughing hysterically, but I mean it's kind of enjoyable. I think the part that I enjoyed the most was, I guess there's two parts, right? So the first one was when we learned the backstory of Johnny Flames.
Right.
Now, he's doing this kind of like magic trick, and I forget how old he was. Like he's in elementary school.
Yeah.
So you kind of have this, and he's doing this magic trick, and there's fire involved with the trick. So obviously, for like a little kid, this is totally outlandish.
Right.
You got him, doing this costume change with fire elements involved. I'm like, okay, this is kind of bizarre. So then, I kind of like laugh at the absurdity of it. And then it's like, oh, he's on fire. And then, or no, so they say his appendage is out, right? To not be super grotesque with it, but his
But I mean, it's
dingleys, right?
obvious. But it's kind of obvious what we're talking about here. I mean,
Oh yes, of course, right? Yeah. So I mean, it's hanging out there, and he's kind of shocked. So he, with his hands on fire, puts his hands over his groin area, right? And I kind of initially I was like laughing at the absurdity, and then I'm like, oh, this is just kind of like stupid humor now. Like I kind of was like, okay, that was just kind of I'm not a huge fan. But then the teacher comes up and he's trying to help him out. And when the students is like, oh no, like that teacher's touching the boy. And I just started laughing. I'm like, oh, okay, now it got me back in. So it's kind of funny how I was on a roller coaster for that joke where I was kind of like, oh, that's kind of funny. And then I was like, okay, this is kind of juvenile now. And then it kind of got me again with the whole teacher thing. So, I think kind of a skit that for the most part worked. And I think the other part that I really, really enjoyed, and it was such a throwaway joke, it's when they're traveling in the car to the mountains and just a random person driving the other side just like yells at them like, I hope your friendship falls apart. And I just burst out laughing. Like that was definitely the funniest part because it was just totally unexpected. And obviously it's like a huge, it's obvious where the joke is coming from. So it just kind of made me laugh. So that part I really enjoyed. I think when they get on their journey, right, when they're actually going to the mountains and everything, I feel like that's where things just kind of drag at certain points. I think just a lot of the little skits and everything just don't really, kind of get me. John kind of has this like whirlwind relationship or whatever you want to call it with one of the park rangers that's there, and I just kind of seem to not really have a whole lot of laughs, or just wasn't really getting anything out of it. There's a part where um, I guess when they find the bust, right? So they eventually make their way to where this treasure map is, or it's on the back of a compass that's kind of showing them where to go. So they eventually get to where the bust is, and there's some kind of like humorous moments with it. The singing I could kind of live without. I can live without. And then we kind of transition over to the fight, which I kind of laughed a little bit, I have to admit, with them just punching each other in the throat a whole bunch.
Yeah.
Just kind of kept going and going. I'm just like, when are they going to stop punching each other? And I guess not. I think when they got to the commune, that's the part that really fell flat for me. To me, that was the weakest part of it, which I guess is like the final third of it. Just felt the weakest. Didn't really care for the commune a whole lot. I did kind of like the mask that they wear when they go out in public. That
Those
made
are
me
really,
laugh. 'Cause the
those are
mask.
really creepy ass masks, by the way, because
Oh
I don't
yeah,
know if it's
exactly.
face. Yeah.
Yes, it just the absolute absurdity of it. I just kind of had a laugh at. I'm like, okay, well, you're not fooling anybody. People are gonna be freaked out by that. So, I did laugh at that, but I thought most of that was pretty forgettable. And then it kind of all culminated with that final fight at the store, where for the most part wasn't a huge fan of it. Like it didn't feel like super over the top. It kind of felt like the scene in Anchorman
Oh
where you
yeah.
just have
Yeah,
all
where all the news stations are fighting each other. Yeah.
exactly, like they just like all these news station people come together, and it's like totally over the top because like they're like using real weapons, and actually I believe that one of them like even uses like a pitchfork or something, and I remember Steve Carell's character like threw a trident at somebody and killed him. So I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm kind of getting this kind of similar vibe for what you're going for to that. So I thought that kind of fell flat. Um, Now Martin did turn into this other character, right? Do you
Yeah,
remember the
Lawrence.
character's-
Yeah.
Lawrence? Thank you.
Yeah.
I turned into that, and I don't know, like they built it up through the movie, like they kind of like showed us stuff and they talked about how funny he was. And then when I saw it, I was just like, like I don't know. I think he could have done something different with it. I think it would have been like funnier if maybe we just see the aftermath where like people just like ripped apart and stuff, and you're like, oh my god, what really happened? Or you just go totally absurd with everything that's going on.
So do you think Lawrence?
So
So do you think Lawrence was, was essential, or do you think we could have
no,
done the fight without Lawrence and we would have been okay?
yeah, we could have lived without it. I mean, you could even driven up the whole Lawrence mystique, and then you just never pay it off, right? So I think there's ways that you could have done it, but I think with how much they talked up Lawrence and some of the scenes that came up, you had an opportunity to kind of go all out, and then I just don't feel like that quite happened.
So you felt
Um,
so you felt the payoff wasn't worth the hype
yes,
then? Okay.
no, definitely not. It did not pay off at the end, at least for me.
Because I mean, like it's
Um,
it's basically just Martin, wearing a wife beater and then shades and just trying to sound
yes,
like Stallone, but not quite hitting it.
yes,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
And
exactly.
and what's also absurd is the fact if you're like a reasonable sized person with a weapon, you see like the skinny guy coming at you and talking, well, in a pseudo Italian accent. I mean, are you really gonna? I mean, are you really just gonna stop there and be like, "Oh my god, I'm afraid of you. What the shit or what the shit are you gonna do to me?" You know?
Yeah, like I thought they could have done something else. Like, it would have just been, I just felt like there was probably better ways to do it. Like, even if he just like all of a sudden just like pulls out a gun and starts shooting people, right? And people are like, oh my god, like why he's shooting people? Like this isn't that big of a deal.
I mean, it is a
Like,
sporting
just
store. I mean,
yes, exactly, right? Like
I was shocked that they didn't have any guns. I'm like, what the fuck? Like if you are a sporting store and you sell outdoor goods, you are gonna have some firearms, lying around. I'm
yeah,
just saying.
yeah, no, I think they had some more opportunities there. Though I guess they did get the running gag with the terrible calling item where he does a little hawk call and it just sounds totally horrendous the whole time. So like I said, it had some humorous parts in it. And I think it's just going to be for one viewer to the next how much you enjoy the comedy. If you're kind of into that type of skit thing, I can imagine people are going to enjoy it. If you're looking for something that's a little bit more cohesive and maybe kind of focus a little bit more on the comedy elements, you might not really enjoy it as much. So I think it kind of definitely falls on person to person on what they want to do.
So what?
Um,
So what did you think about the treasure itself, the bust of Marie Antoinette? Because that because that to me seemed like a pretty novel idea in terms of of $100 million treasure. You know what I mean?
it definitely sticks out, right? I mean, out of all the things that you could have, a bust of Marie Antoinette is definitely I guess, a treasure you're not really expecting. I think to like Indiana Jones and a lot of his quests for some of these treasures and everything, and they're going out there finding this stuff. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of um, I was surprised a little bit that they kind of found it. I thought it would be more of like their journey, and they kind of um, find their friendship, kind of that cliche of, oh, well, the treasure was the friendship that we mended along the way type of mentality.
Yeah,
But no,
exactly.
like halfway through, they're like, nope, we found it. And there's a weird, I don't know, skinless bear or something that's behind the door, which I won't even question. But yeah, it was definitely kind of a funny thing to see. But yeah, I think it was, as I said, depending on how much you enjoy that type of comedy, I think it'll hit with some and not with others. Because I think when I checked Rotten Tomatoes before, it's like 40% for the critic, but it's like 90% audience.
Yeah, I
So I think it's
mean,
something where we see a lot of division.
yeah, and plus keep in mind, I mean, please don't destroy. They pretty much cater to the younger demographics. Um,
Oh yes, yes, this is
y-
definitely more for a younger audience.
yeah, so like 18 to 25-year-olds. So a lot of the stuff that they're saying they're doing it would pretty much just vibe with them. Whereas, us, grandpas, where it's just gonna fly over our heads for the most part. What did you think of of the jokes and the dialogue? Because I felt like I felt like I felt like a few items did kind of work, kind of like for instance, that guy yelling, "I hope your friendship falls apart." I thought that was a pretty a pretty good job right there. But for the most part, when I was listening to it, I'm like, these guys are just trying so hard to sound clever, but they're not really saying anything clever. Because the big one that sticks out was when they showed up to work, and Ben's dad's like, "You guys are late for work. You guys are like 4 or 5 hours late." And then he's like, "Oh, by the way, the cops are looking for you. You bought alcohol for minors." And Martin's like, "Oh, well, they're European. They had the sort of jeunesse."
I think you just have to, at least for me, I kind of just, had that kind of understanding that when I was watching this, like I'm clearly not watching it for any type of amazing narrative. I'm just going with the punches, and depending on what you enjoy or what you don't enjoy, you'll definitely have, I would say, varying levels of enjoyment for this movie because it is all over the place as far as the humor goes. So
because they're
what
painting
works
with a
for some will
because they're
not work
painting
for others.
because they're trying to paint with a broad brush, really. If I'm hearing you right, because they're like, because they're making jokes about, your European jokes, in one instance, and then they're making jokes about, people's equipment sticking out of their clothing in another, and then and then they've got, this sort of, boy versus girl kind of, you know friendly rivalry thing going on in another. So it's like they're trying to do all these different things to try to appeal to all these different people, and in the process they're kind of like falling flat on their face, really. you know um and I think you mentioned it earlier, but it just sounds like they're just trying to do too much with all these different disjointed sketches, and trying to like wrap it in the overall narrative of finding treasure. But it's not really. I mean, it's not really a story. The traditional sense is just a bunch of things put together. Um,
Yes, yes, it does feel like a lot of that is strung together. I feel like you have like ideas there that work, and then you have a bunch that don't, because it's like, okay, well, we're doing a movie, so okay, what are we good at? Well, we know how to have humor. We know, kind of these shorter kind of things that we work on all the time. And then when you're trying to create this 90-minute long movie, you have to kind of have this cohesive narrative, which I think, I mean, it's there, it's in the background, but obviously it's never really the focus.
Right.
So I think they kind of, as I said, it's like pretty much any comedy that I've ever watched, right? There's peaks and valleys, and depending on where you're at, you're gonna have a lot more peaks versus a lot more valleys.
Well, it's also typical
So
of these.
mileage will vary depending.
Well, I was also going to say because it's also very typical of these SNL movies, also because for the most part, I mean, I mean, if you're a fan of the show, or if you're a fan of a particular actor or troupe, this is going to work for you. But if you're not, then this is just going to fly right over your head. And I think that's pretty typical of what you see with any SNL movie. I think this is one of those SNL movies that that we've seen it, and it's quickly going to be forgotten within the next week or so. Um, just because there's nothing. I mean, there's nothing profound. Not that we are looking for anything profound, but there's nothing about it that makes it stand out. Because you remember with the old SNL movies, like even though they were annoying as hell, I mean, I mean they are pretty memorable. Like for instance, Night at the Roxbury. Whenever you hear that song, "What Is Love," what your automatic instinct is to bob your head because of what you see in that movie. Whereas here, there's really nothing about it that stands out. It's just there for the most part.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I'd agree with that. I think there's definitely some memorable things that you might be getting from older SNL movies compared to this now. And I think some of that just goes to like just comedy kind of morphing over the years, right? Where I think nowadays a lot more people are attached to TikTok videos and all that stuff. So I think it's just kind of where we're transitioning as far as the humor goes. And that's not, don't want to paint that with a broad stroke, so to speak, because there's still a lot of people that will enjoy different aspects of it. But yeah, I think you could say that some of that just goes to there's a lot things not going to be as memorable as they used to be, especially with some of the characters that they had created in the past with SNL.
right. Well, I mean, Conan O'Brien's character said best when he was talking to Ben. Your generation likes to shorten things. I mean, this
Yeah.
movie is pretty much that. It's pretty much the epitome of what he said, because it's just a bunch of short little things kind of just strung together, and the only common theme is finding this treasure, or
Yep.
finding the treasure, having the treasure, and keeping the treasure, basically. So what would your overall score for this movie be then?
Yeah. So I will say I'm just gonna slap this kind of smack dab in the middle and give it a 2.5 Marie Antoinette bust out of 5. It just, like I said, kind of I think just falls right in the middle. There's like I did enjoy some things. I laughed at some parts, and other parts it just felt like it was going on for too long. So I think for myself, like there's probably like maybe 2 or 3 times where I had a genuinely good laugh. Some of the times I was kind of smirking. Other parts I was like, oh man, like I really hope we move on because this is just not landing. So, mileage will definitely vary from person to person. It definitely wasn't something where I was busting my gut the whole time. But in that same token, I have seen far worse comedies. So there at least was a few parts in this where I could get a chuckle out of.
Gotcha. Well, I'm gonna one up you, and I'm gonna give it a 1.9 out of 5 Marie
Oh,
Antoinette bus.
goodness gracious.
I mean, to be honest with you, there's nothing about this movie that stands out that just makes me think. There are moments of it that I genuinely liked. I mean, from beginning to end, it was pretty much just it was just me rolling my eyes over and over again, to the point where I was wondering, is it going to roll? Are they going to roll so far back into my head? I'm just going to be able to see my brain, because the jokes didn't land. The jokes, I mean, and I get that the jokes are written for a certain audience. So if you're of a certain age group or a certain mindset, this is going to click for you. But for me, it was just one of those things where they were just trying so hard to be funny. It was like, this is just ridiculous. I mean, and some of the things that they were doing, I thought, yeah, it's pretty funny. Like, for instance, Johnny Flame. All right, oh yeah, that's pretty funny. His willy is sticking out. But but then they just keep piling on more and more. I'm like, okay, it's starting to get old now, and I felt that was just a recurring thing over and over again. Um, I do agree with you. Conan O'Brien was one of the very few characters who I genuinely enjoyed watching. Um, at but at the same token, I kind of felt like there were some scenes where maybe he could have just been less involved. Um, such as when he's talking to Ben about oh, by the way, there are only two things I love: it's money and power. I just felt like if he just like didn't say anything at all, that would have been a bit more impressioning for Ben, because then Ben would be trying to figure out, well, what exactly does he like? I'm trying to figure this out so I can because it would have made the journey a bit more meaningful for him, because now that he knows, oh, all I got to do is just dress up like a rich Texan, yeah, then my dad will respect me. Um, I agree with you. The cult aspect was one of those elements that shouldn't have been in the movie at all, because it added nothing to it. It gave us that big fight, which really didn't need to happen, and it gave us Deech, that crazy cult leader, who, frankly, wasn't very funny. I'm sorry, but that scene where he's like wearing that giant carnival head, and he's like, "Oh, who are these three black guys? Oh, who's this Chinese family?" And he takes it off. I'm like, dude, just knock it off, man. I mean, there's nothing funny about that. I mean, and I know some of y'all, you're probably watching like, wow, this guy has no sense of humor. But the thing is that with this movie, it's just, like you said, Lee, it's very much just one sketch after another. But these are sketches that don't really go anywhere. You know, they just start off with a joke. They try to sound clever. It's a quick, clever quip, and then they move on. And I'm like, this doesn't land for me. This doesn't vibe at all. Really. So, like I said, I mean, really, the only thing I enjoyed was Conan O'Brien's performance, and I will give them props for filming in North Carolina. So, so that's always a favorable thing. Plus, and I sent you a text about this too. That scene where they're with the cult, it reminded me very much of a Bushwhacker story that we did in season 1.
Yes.
This is the very first episode that that you actually did voice acting work on. It's the episode "The Right to Bear Arms." I mean, it had all of the elements except for the treasure. So I kept thinking, I'm like, I know I got some pretty decent views on that video. Like, they didn't watch that video and just think to themselves, huh, let's just take this guy's idea because no one's ever going to notice, and just tweak it a bit. So it might sound a bit absurd, but that's what I'm going with. So yeah, that's my score, 1.9 Marie Antoinette busts out of 5.
All right.
It's very, very harsh. I think it's one of the harshest scores I've ever given on this on our reviews.
Yeah, I'm like, it just seems like you flat out just did not enjoy it, or at least I got some elements out of it. So I guess perfect example, right, of two people having two different tastes and looking at things in two different ways.
I mean, but that's why we do the podcast, is because it's because obviously we're going to look at the same thing and come up with two different conclusions. Just like we can say how much we don't like a movie and then talk to a filmmaker the next week who gives us an explanation as to why they film or they write things the way they do. I mean, obviously,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, obviously, it's easy for us to say why, what we don't like about a movie, but it's completely different when you're in that position and you have to write it, and then you have to justify to yourself why that has to be. I mean, if any of y'all have listened to the episodes that we've done with filmmakers, I mean, there's just so many things that go into it. It's on one hand, you do want to feel sympathetic for them because you understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, it's like, really, you could have done better, dude. So, but yeah, that's going to do it for our review of The Treasure of Foggy Mountain. Let us know in the comments below what you think. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one. Ciao.